Now remember, in the last video, we got to the point in Plato's Ion where, there's this sort of dispute over this boundary of the techne, right? Of the skill, of the profession. And Ion has been basically, reiterating over and over, look, whatever my skill is, because we haven't figured out exactly what it is. Um, Ion has been basically saying the same thing. Look, I can speak about Homer, and I'm the best at that. But as far as other poets, no. So he keeps insisting, really, my skill lies with Homer. So I have this kind of Homer techne. And Socrates has been arguing that you can't have a Homer techne because if you had a techne about Homer, it would really be a poet techne. So again, Socrates is saying he's making an important point about knowledge. You can't have just no, if it is knowledge that you have, right? We haven't established that, but if it is, dear Ion, knowledge that you have about Homer, it can't be just limited to Homer. That doesn't seem to work. It would have to be something you can apply more broadly. So underneath this dialogue really is a commentary on the nature of knowledge. What constitutes knowledge? And can you have knowledge of just, does it make sense to talk about knowledge that only applies to one thing and it doesn't have any applications beyond that one thing? And Socrates is basically arguing no. But that doesn't mean you can't have a different cognitive or a different kind of, well, cognitive is probably not the right word, but a different kind of relationship to an object that you might have some grasp of. But Socrates' underlying point is, dear Ion, that is not going to fit what we think of as knowledge. Okay, so around 532 in our Stephanus numbers, Socrates starts kind of, goes and let's look at, the art of poetry, the profession of poetry as a whole, right? And so there's going to be a techne, not surprising, to poetry as a whole, and to other subjects as well. Like there's an art of poetry, there is an art of musicianship or music making, music writing. There would be an art or a skill to chariot wheel repairs and things like that. So these are kinds of skills and domains. Now, what do I mean more about this domain or subject or whatever? Now, this isn't directly in the dialogue, but we can think of what's going on running around in the background of the dialogue are some notions about knowledge and subjects. Namely, think of the term, the English word discipline. Okay, now without getting into a big history of the term, but we use, like as a discipline, like to discipline, you discipline a child or you discipline a dog. Basically, what are you doing? You're trying to get the organism to follow some kinds of rules, right? Simple. When you're trying to discipline a kid, I mean, we normally think of it kind of in a moral sense, like, discipline, but we also like trying to teach discipline so that the organism can do something for itself, right? So that a child learns some discipline. You need some discipline. What does that mean? Well, that the child gets better at regulating its own behavior, right? What does it mean to regulate one's behavior? Well, it's usually to make it conform in some way to rules and how to have a nice regulated form of behavior. While those rules should be coherent, they should fit together. It shouldn't be all over the place because then you're not really regulated. Same thing when you discipline a dog. You're teaching the dog, housebreaking a dog, right? Here are the rules. They're doggo. Here's where you may go to the washroom, and here's where you learn not to do that. So the dog then eventually becomes regulated about its own bathroom functions according to a rule, which corresponds to how a household will run. So discipline is, and also, and the notion of discipline is it becomes a disposition, right? If you're disciplined, you have a disposition to behave in certain ways. And again, those ways, and it's all, the rules will be that you follow, that you're disciplined to follow, will have a coherency. They fit together and they will be consistent. They don't conflict with each other, right? So it all has this sort of integrated whole. Well, that's what he's getting at here. Like this sort of skill or whatever, as applying to a whole, corresponds to this inner logic of this thing you're talking about, that the rules all fit together. And of course, a discipline, that's a branch of knowledge. So all this tends to link up with this notion of having a techne, you know, a branch, it applies to a branch of knowledge, and a branch of knowledge, it can't just apply to simple, or a branch of knowledge doesn't apply to just one thing, it applies to kind of a group of things. So there's a correspondence, which Plato will later unpack in much more detail, between the nature of knowledge and the nature of reality, right? So knowledge is in these sections corresponding to the way reality is in sections, or as Plato in his lovely term, knowledge and reality, their reality is cut at the joints, right? There are natural divisions in reality, and knowledge will follow those. Anyways, that's gone into more detail in later dialogues, like the Republic and Phaedo and whatnot. But you can see that it's in the background of the dialogue here. So Socrates then says, okay, let's look at a variety of subjects, disciplines, areas, branches of knowledge, like painting, flute playing, singing, etc., rhapsodizing. He says, if you look at people that can do that, dear Ion, have you ever met anyone that who is really good at talking about painting with respect to a particular artist and says something like this? Well, somebody can talk about painting and say that artist, I can say what's good and bad in their work. And that other painter, so we're talking about painting. So that painter, I can say what's good and bad. Let's modernize it. Yeah, I can say what's good and bad in Van Gogh, right? Or Van Gogh, however you like to pronounce it. I can say what's good and bad in that fella's work. And I can also say what's good and bad in Rembrandt. In other words, same thing in music. I can say what's good and bad in Bach, and I can also say what's good and bad in Mozart. Have you ever met anyone, Socrates says to Ion, who could say, what's good and bad in well, of course not Bach, but good and bad in a given artist in a given area, but couldn't say what's good and bad about a given artist in that very same area? So, and Ion says, no, I've never known anybody like that. Okay, so they're talking now of the level of trying to get an empirical generalization. So when you think about the critics that when they're talking, what kind of pattern emerges from your experience, Ion, with critics? And it goes something like this. Here, the logic comes out to be this. If a person P, like a critic, let's just keep it simple. If a person like a critic can say both what is well done and poorly done by a practitioner of an area or a discipline Z. Okay, so if a person can do that, both what is well done, poorly done by Q in area Z, then that person can also say what is well done and poorly done by a different practitioner R in that area Z. So if you can say what's well done and poorly done by a painter, by Van Gogh in painting, then you can also say what is well done and poorly done by Rembrandt in the area of painting. Have you ever seen that rule violated? Is that safe to say that that's a kind of a generalization that looks good to you, Ion? And Ion goes, yeah, I don't think I've ever met anyone like that. A little weird, but yeah, I don't think I've met anyone like that who can do this. But again, remember, this is just a generalization, right? And it's an empirical one. It could fail. And as a matter of fact, put it this way, this still permits wiggle room, right? Because after all, if it's just an empirical generalization, really all you can say, it's like an induction. You can say, well, so far, it seems to be the case that this holds. I could take a risk and, make an inductive leap, an inductive inference and say, well, for all cases, if a person can do this, then they can do that. Okay, that seems fairly reasonable, but you can't be sure because it's not a deduction, it's an induction. In other words, it could be the case that the next person you come along breaks this rule, that they can do this and they can't do that. All right, so Ion, Ion has, again, Ion's always enjoying all this. I love listening to you talk, Socrates. You're a smart guy, etc., etc. Ion, of course, as we met him at the beginning of the dialogue, he's a prize-winning rhapsode. He just won at the festival of Asclepius. and he's he's got a very healthy view of his skills, and it's not surprising that he's going to say, yeah, that applies to other people, but it does not apply to me, right? That Ion, kind of break this rule, right? He says, I'm still, someone who breaks this rule because for me, Ion, I can say what's well done and poorly done in the area of Homer, right? But again, I fall asleep. I don't have anything to contribute. I'm not interested in anybody else. I can't do it, right? And as we saw, Socrates sort of alluded, well, it can't be knowledge what you have. You can't have it. It can't be a techne in that strict sense of knowledge and training and mastery. Again, so he's going to. We're given another hint that it's got to be something different. So remember, Socrates isn't denying that Ion is pretty good at his trade, right? Again, he's just not quite sure what Ion is doing, right? Like, is this what is this really a techne, or what is going on here? But he's not denying that Ion is capable, is a good rhapsode or whatever. He's just trying to figure out what it is. And that's an important thing to remember in a lot of things. Socrates isn't a skeptic per se. He's not saying, hey, I doubt the existence of the techne altogether. I doubt knowledge. He's not playing that game. He's admitting that there's something there, and it's not captured nicely in our language or Reddit or whatever. But there's something behind going on that we're trying to get to, right? Whatever it is that Ion is doing, he's doing something, and it merits investigation, but we don't know what it is. So again, that is, presupposing that Ion is doing something for real. And skeptics might just say, hey, there's nothing, there's no story to this. You're just wasting your time. There is no knowledge anyways, right? So Socrates isn't playing that game. So he's not a skeptic. He's you could say he's kind of a skeptical inquirer, but he's not a straightforward skeptic. Okay, so we got this wiggle room. So Ion, he digs in his heels and he says that, again, I can do the Homer thing, but I can't do with anyone else. And then he says, so what do you make of that, Socrates? So take that. And Socrates says that, once again, okay, then whatever you're doing, we're still trying to figure it out. It can't be the result of mastery of the subject. It doesn't fit any of this, right? It doesn't fit the logic of what seems to apply to a discipline or a subject or a branch of knowledge. You just don't fit. So you're the strange one, Ion, and we'll try and figure this out. Again, it would seem odd if, just the real interesting philosophical point is, it would be odd if a veterinarian, you take your dog to a vet and they say, oh, okay, I can treat your dog, but I can't treat any other dog because I don't know dogs. I just know your dog. That would be odd, right? You would think that's weird. I mean, you might say, well, vet might be good with dogs but not so great with cats. So there would be sort of specialization allowed, but the specialization would bottom out somewhere. It wouldn't bottom out it wouldn't be so fundamental that a vet only specializes in your dog or her dog. Dogs, but not cats. Okay, go to the cat vet that's over there. But even then, the fact that you call a dog veterinarian and a cat veterinarian, there would be some principles, veterinary science, that underpin both, so that we say they are maybe subdisciplines of the main discipline of veterinarian science. So what we're trying to think of here is, what's the limit of specialization? What's the limit of knowledge? Can you not only know one thing, but know only one thing? That would be strange, right? And that's what seems counterintuitive according to Socrates, because knowledge just doesn't function like that. So if you are directly connected to one and only one thing, as in our buddy Ion, who claims to be only connected to Homer, well, that connection, that can't be a cognitive, a rational connection. But we're going to see that Ion doesn't like this idea of where it goes if you sort of break this notion of it can't be cognitive and then it can't be rational. Ion doesn't quite like that, but that's getting a little bit ahead of the story. So anyways, we got a very interesting point about knowledge here. So, what is Ion's connection, his excellence with Homer? How does that work? Doesn't seem to be really kind of like a techne, but something's there. Again, around 533. Let's see if I'm getting these numbers right. Yeah, 533, our Stephanus number. Check around 533e, around there. Socrates says, okay, you know what? I don't think that you, Ion, have mastered an area, that you really have like a techne in that. I'm going to try another thing. I'm going to try and think about another way to understand your excellence, and I'm just broadening it out. Your excellence with Homer, your ability or capacity or whatever with Homer, that really isn't the result of the mastery of a discipline. It's not, as a matter of fact, and also with the notion of discipline, like a predisposition to follow a particular set of rules, that probably isn't right either. So what's going on? Once again, Socrates is not denying that something is going on vis-a-vis Ion and the connection to Homer, but he still hasn't figured out what it is, but he's ruling it out that it's some area of knowledge. And he's going to go a little further and say that it's not even rational, right? And Ion's kind of playing along with stuff. But he's eventually going to, once, like he's done before, he kind of digs his heels in from time to time. So we'll have to check that out, though, in the next video. Stay tuned.